stirring our children, teaching our children how to obey us. But tonight today, this morning, I want to build on that because obedience in its own self, having children who obey, is not a sufficient standard. It's relatively easy, as if you were training dogs, to get your children to obey you. They will respond to the right stimulus. If you bribe them or poke them with a stick, or whatever, you can get your children to obey you. At the end of the day, what we're wanting is much more than that, because as believers, we actually want our children to have in their hearts a very clear understanding of right and wrong, and to love right, to love the good that there is. So, and that ultimately leads to a love of God, because God is good. He is everything that we want to see in our children is in God. It's like, if you think of the kindness, the justice, the fairness, the forgiveness, the self-control, everything, the very picture of who God is, that's what we wanted to see in our children. So we want them to love good and to love God, and to be able to outwork that practically in the world around them, because that it looks like something, and it looks like us having self-control and being able to respect and honor one another. And so it's a very, very practical thing to love to good, and to it really does have great value, and it attracts incredible blessing from God and from man. So if you think of, just from a worldly point of view, if your children have the right characteristics, they will do well in life. If you know how to honor people, if you know how to respect, and if you know how to have self-control, and if you know all these life skills, it really stands you in good stead, irrespective of your education or whatever you do. Literally, whatever you put your hand to, if you have the right characteristics, just at a worldly level, you will do well in this world. But of course, we are aiming much higher than that. We are looking into eternity, and for our children to do well in the faith, and to love God, and to be in that space. So that's really what we are wanting to cover today. I don't know if, just on that point, if any of you are in situations where you employ people and you have an interview process, and you are looking through piles of CVs and then interviewing people for a job. I've done it occasionally and helped in interviews and things like that. And I must be honest, you can look at a pile of CVs, and everybody's got their accolades and all the great things they've done and their qualifications, and I just skim through that. You very quickly can see whether a person is qualified to do a job. And then I look for in between the lines. What do they do with their lives? Who are they as a person? And when I'm questioning them, I don't question them, can you do this, can you do that, tell me about your education. Because any gaps in education can be filled. You can train a person to do anything, actually. What I want to know is, do you have character? Do you have character? Are you honest? When I'm not watching, will you do your job? Those are the things that really count. And that's for the love of good, that we want to build on that. So, how do we do that? What we see is, if we can bring up the first slide there, we notice very quickly when you have young children that they do not come pre-programmed with any of this. They do not come with morality, which is the knowledge of good and evil, the knowledge of right and wrong. They do not necessarily obey their conscience. They don't know yet, and they're not aware of their conscience, that inner voice that is speaking to them, and they certainly do not have self-control, young children. So we come into the world, our children come into the world lacking in all of these incredibly important areas. So the role of parenting is to build that, to train our children, so we discipline them. That's really the core of discipline. Discipline is not punishment. Discipline is installing morality, it's installing conscience, it's installing self-control, so that when our children emerge from our parenting, at some point, 2 decades later, they are going to have some measure of control.
We used that analogy on the first night for those who weren't here of a cell phone. When you get a cell phone, it's got a whole lot of apps that you don't like. And so you find yourself, what I do, is I'm uninstalling a whole lot of stuff off my phone and putting on the things I want. My banking app, WhatsApp, my email thing that I like. And parenting parenting is like that. We get these children who arrive like a cell phone. They've got all these pre-installed apps of selfishness and greed and all those negative things of just being a human. And our task as a parent is to uninstall selfishness and to install kindness and love and all those other things.
So just to remind you, God has placed your children in your family. You are the parents. You are the perfect parents. That's God. God has given you that mandate, and but I just want you to remind you, when you do well in this area of parenting, when you train up moral children who can listen to their conscience, who have self-control, you are affecting a huge number of people. Multiple generations to come will be affected by what you do as a parent now. So you're not just fighting for good. Listen, I keep saying this. You're not just fighting for well-behaved children, because it's a low standard. What you must think down the line, and the scriptures think down the line, because they speak about it in Deuteronomy, where it says, teach, talking about the moral laws, it says, teach them to your children and to your children's children, so that they can teach it to their children. It's like thinking down the line of all these generations of people, and the battles that we win in the face of a culture that is going quite in the other direction, to be honest. The world is not going to hold the standards of morality together. The cultures around us are losing all of their... They used to have a lot of high standards of morality. In other words, pornography wasn't easily available, and X-rated movies you didn't just watch on TV. It was... Whereas you look at... honestly, I think if you were to show our grandparents what you can watch on DSTV, what our children can watch on DSTV, they would be horrified. Because in their generation, there was like a societal, some boundaries in society about what is reasonable. Those have all fallen away. So we cannot look to our culture of the day to hold morality in any way together. It's going to be our job as parents. And we must understand that as we make a stand, as you make a stand in your family to say, this is what we are going to do, you are effectively putting in a flag in the ground in the face of an enemy who's going to laugh at you and ridicule you and say you're a fundamentalist Christian, and you will, that is the persecution we're going to face as a generation as we make a stand. So you've got to be ready for that, in a sense. So.
And the one thing when Richard referred to that scripture of teach your children to teach their children, as Christian parents, there also is this whole thing that we actually have to proactively teach our children about Jesus. If you sit in a doctor's waiting room all your life, you're not going to become a doctor. If your children come to church with you every Sunday and they just sit in church every Sunday, it doesn't mean they're going to become a Christian. You have to proactively tell your children about the goodness of God. Tell your children who Jesus is. Tell your children how to access Jesus. Tell them who God is. And then to tell your children to tell their children. You can't just assume that because your children understand the saving knowledge of Jesus Christ, that they will tell their children. So even now, I'll say to my kids, there'll be a situation and I'll go, that's why you need to tell your children about Jesus, so that they know how to handle a situation like that when they're younger. And then you must tell their children to tell their children. You've got to purposely pass on the baton. It doesn't happen through osmosis. It's got to be intentionally passed on.
Good. So, one of the things we're going to look at this morning is parenting through the ages of growth in our children. So the picture I've used here is like a funnel. And at the bottom you'll see there's a bar, and as the bar sort of expands to the right and the left, we're looking at increasing age. And the central statement is that there are a whole lot of privileges that our children and freedoms that our children are going to enjoy over time, but it's over time. In other words, we most easily see this in the areas of health and safety, okay? So nobody just allows their 3-year-old to fire up a chainsaw and start sort of waving it around as a toy. It's an extremely dangerous tool, and you require some sort of knowledge. I really enjoy woodwork, and I've got a workshop full of things that can chop your arm off at the blink of an eye. And I had to teach my children how to use those machines safely. So they're all teenagers now, and any of them can sort of wander into the garage and they can operate the machinery safely. But it wasn't a privilege that was allowed at a young age, because they just didn't have a young child doesn't have the capacity to, like the physical capacity or the mental capacity to understand how to use a dangerous machine.
Yeah.
So you would be alarmed if your 2-year-old climbed up an 8-meter high ladder, which young boys are very prone to doing, and will naturally rush up a ladder, but it's actually very unsafe because they don't have the mechanical skill to actually handle that responsibility. So in exactly the same way, we're going to see a whole lot of areas of behavior where you're going to say, age appropriate, you can have that freedom, but at a younger age, you do not have the freedom to behave in a certain way. You can't make those decisions. You can't live like that. Those are privileges that will come with a demonstration of self-control. So it's not just that at the age, for example, of cell phones. So all our children desperately want cell phones. But actually, having a cell phone gives you access to a world that is very dangerous. And many a child has been trapped into a route of, say, pornography or gambling or some other area of sin because they were not ready to handle that responsibility that is given to them as much as they would love it. So that's a really good example of saying, well, for us, it's not just an age. I would be very hesitant just to say, well, when you turn 13, you can get a cell phone. Because the issue isn't age, it's self-control.
Yeah.
What are you going to do if you happily browsing through something else? I mean, I've had this. I'm sure if anybody has access to the internet, you're looking for something, you're scrounging on Google, you're doing some research, and a website pops up or a picture pops up that is very inappropriate. And you, at that point, your self-control has to be exercised to say, I'm not going to go down that road. I'm not going to click on that invitation for pornography or whatever it might be. And it's only self-control is what will stop you going that road.
Yeah.
So if you do not have self-control, if your children do not have self-control, then we do not want to give them access to it. So a 15-year-old can have less self-control than some 12-year-olds. So it's about self-control. So the point of it is that the funnel represents our children's capacity for self-control. And as they get older, you would expect more self-control, so they are given more freedom. But it's retractable. It's not a right. Owning a cell phone is not a right. It's a privilege. So if they show, and they will show, times of lack of self-control, so that they'll be getting better and better, and then they do something which demonstrates clearly they've lost a bit of self-control, and maybe the privilege is taken back for a while. And that's really the heart of age-appropriate parenting.
So we have the cell phone thing. Some people think we're too strict. Our children, we do homeschool our children, so we don't need to get hold of them as such. So our older kids only got cell phones at the age of 15 when they exhibited self-control. We do have an old phone at home. It's called the cracked phone. It's got its own SIM card. It does have access to the internet, but that's what we call the home phone. And it's really, really old. And that's the one, if they go for a run, or they go to a friend's house, or they go somewhere and we need to get hold of them, they take that phone with them. And it's so uncool, and they don't ever want to show it in public. But it's a way that we can communicate with them. And so our younger boys keep on saying, when I turn 15, I can get a phone. And we go, no. When you exhibit self-control, and we know we can trust you, then you might have one. And then we've also had to think that, Mom, I can use my pocket money. I've been saving up for 5 years. I can buy my own phone. And then we say, that was a hard one. Then we go, no, not in our house. We said, that's not being a good steward. We feel that would be a waste of money, and that's not being a good steward of the finances that God has blessed you with, and we're called to be good stewards of our money, so therefore we're not going to allow you to buy one, even if you could afford one.
Oh.
So we're not very popular, but...
At the end of the day, sorry,
just the last thing is, so now our older kids have been saying to us, thank you, Mum and Dad, for being so strict. I almost fell over. It's like, really, thank you that you didn't give us those freedoms, because we see now why. It could have been potentially dangerous. Now we can handle it, but we're grateful that you were so strict.
I think it's amazing when our older kids have said that to us, because they've seen in their friends who were given some freedoms at a younger age, they've actually seen the fruit of some of those decisions. When they look at their peers, at 19 and 17, they go, look, sure, that guy's in a bit of trouble there. And they can see the link that they were given access to something they couldn't handle at a younger age. And that's So it's been at the end of the day, this sort of thinking does not make you popular necessarily with your children. So you've got to be confident that you don't have to be best friends with young children.
Yeah.
That is not your role. You are parents to young children, not best friends to young children. Friendship comes later in life. So like we are really good friends with our older two children. Honestly, we have an incredibly relaxed, friendly relationship. It's not us giving what we don't often sort of speak into their lives in the sense of do this, do that, don't do that. That time is past now. We're actually enjoying the fruit of years of parenting, and it's delightful. It really is delightful with our older two children. But you know, they did not like us all the time when they were younger, because we were strict parents, and they didn't get to do all the stuff that some of their friends were doing. And it's okay. It honestly is okay. They will come to like you in time, and it's fine. It doesn't mean to say you are unnecessarily harsh, but you're going to have strict and firm boundaries, and you stick to them because you're thinking long term. In the moment, you might be thinking, "Oh, shame, you know, I need to be, my youngster's not really happy with me. How do I get them to love me?" It'll come in time.
And just one last thing I feel to add is, with regard to this funnel, another thing is social media accounts. Our children haven't been allowed social media accounts until they were 18. Our daughter got Instagram when she was 18. And our son only now has got an Instagram account at 17 because they've exhibited self-control. Because if you give a 12-year-old an Instagram account, they have access to so much that is so unhelpful. And we know numerous families where Instagram has caught up with their children on what they're posting. They post inappropriate things, they're posting a whole lot of stuff that has just got them into so much trouble. And that is because they haven't got the self-control. It's like giving a 12-year-old a chainsaw, like social media, Instagram, Facebook, whatever it is. So just to think big is what we're trying to say, is don't just give in because society says, well, if Facebook says you can be 13 and get a Facebook account. Well, okay, that's all right, but what is God saying to us as a family?
Great, if we can go to the next slide there. So we've split this up into 4 stages of parenting, which we're going to look at individually. And they start the very narrow part at the bottom, which is the boundaries, that we've called these as our terms. And the boundaries are approximately the 0 to 5-year-old bracket, training in the 5 to 12-year-old bracket, coaching from 12 to 18, and then friendship, 18 plus. And obviously the specific years are just they're just an idea. These things more flow into each other, not exact boundaries, and obviously there's no distinction from 5. From the moment you turn 5, there's like this massive anything. And every child, in a sense, has a different pattern of how they emerge through this. So these are really just just a mechanism to try to understand that your children go through stages, your parenting goes through stages. Each child will be unique in its process, and significantly, you just don't want to get the order wrong. In other words, like I was saying, you don't want to try and be friends with the 0 to 4-year-old because you will be reluctant to parent them. And then you'll see I've put there on the right this transition from obedience through to submission to honor. And what I'm trying to illustrate there is very much how God wants us to relate to Him and how you can relate to your children. In the younger years, you are going to require obedience from your children. That is the time when actually your word does count. They don't get to argue with you. They don't get the rights of debate and discussion because they're still very young and you are the senior authority in the home, and you're going to require obedience of your children. And I'll speak more about that in a moment. You are going to, that's why we call those younger years boundaries. You set the boundaries, and like the drawing the line in the sand I spoke about last night. And as a married couple, you would, or the parent, you would set those boundaries, and they are your boundaries, and the children, they get to obey. That's their responsibility. They get to obey. But we don't stop there. I mean, obedience is, as I keep saying, is a low standard. And, you know, God requires us to obey Him. He wants us to obey Him. And He could get us to obey Him 100%. If God showed you His glory and then said, jump, you would ask how high. There's no question about it. It would just be, He could, if He wanted to, just inflict on us an absolute requirement for obedience. And in some ways, the Old Testament paints those sort of pictures. He expected the Israelites to obey Him. But actually, that's not God's heart. He wants us to be at the next level above that, which is submission. Submission is not like obedience in that obedience you will obey, for example, out of fear. Many of us obey the rules of the road not because we like them, but because we fear the punishment that might come if we disobey them. So I don't know how many of you get caught speeding or get a traffic fine. You know what I mean? It's not that how many of you, if you're honest with yourself, if you know there's a traffic camera or some regular roadblock, you know, you go tearing down the road and then just before the corner you slow down. tearing off again. And it's because you are in obedience. You're in the low level of this whole thing. You're in obedience out of fear of punishment. And it's actually, your heart is not in the right place, ultimately, when you're in that space. Okay, so the next thing is submission. Submission is when you say, out of respect for authority, I am happily prepared to obey. Maybe you have that sort of relationship with your work, your boss, if you have a boss. So your boss says, do this. Maybe you're not delighted to do that, but actually because you respect your boss, you'll do it. And your heart is, in a sense, in a good place, and you recognize the lines of authority, and you submit. Submit means to bring yourself voluntarily under somebody else's authority. That's really what you're doing. You're coming under a recognized authority and you receive it as such. Oh, thank you so much. I go through a lot of water preaching. Yeah. I have to bring my own drum. And, so that's what submission is. But even then, that is not the standard that God is aiming for ultimately. And neither should we as parents ultimately aim for it. We go through it, we take our children through it. What you really want is honor. Now, honor is when I can look at another person and say, I see the value that God places in you. I see the gifting that He places in you. And out of honor for who you are as a person, I will what's the right word? Have come into a mutually respectful relationship that is where I'm not trying to push myself ahead. I'm trying to struggle to describe it.
So an example is we just recently handed over our church on Sunday to a younger couple. We transitioned. We felt God say that there was a new season, and we don't have the gifting that God requires for the leaders, the lead elders for the new season of our church community. And we felt God say that Brian and Amy, who are an amazing, amazing couple, who are on eldership team with us, they're the ones with the gifts and the strengths that have to take our church community into our inheritance. Brian is 31, Richard is 47. He isn't just obeying Brian. We're still in eldership with them, so we're still part of the eldership team. He obeys Brian, but he also submits, but he honors Brian. He sees the gift that he is to our local church, what God has placed on him. And even though we are Gogo and Baba to them, it's like we willingly submit and honor who they are, and we will follow them, even though they're 15, 20 years our junior.
So that's what you're aiming for with your children. So you transition them. That's a transitional process. Your 3-year-old will not honor you. They're not there yet. They have to obey you. But you don't stay there. You don't stay at the level of requiring obedience. And likewise, if you are requiring your late teenager to obey you, you're missing something. Because you can get it, but you will get it out of in a way that will frustrate them. In other words, so you can be a strict, harsh parent to a teenager, late teenager, 18 years old, and with the language of, while you're in my home, you will obey me, you will do this, I'm the head of the home. And you can achieve obedience, but it comes at quite a big cost to them, and it doesn't necessarily lead them into a place where they are able to submit and honor to you. So it's easiest to achieve obedience in the younger years, and really it's such a key point, because a lot of what we're going to talk about now is going to be, you might think, wow, that in the younger years, why am I being so strict? Why is it important that I require my children to obey me when they eat, the way they eat, their manners at the table, the way they interact with other older people, whether they're allowed to climb on the furniture or not, whether they get to choose when they watch TV. You might be thinking, so all this stuff, it seems so strict, it seems so unnecessary. And any one of those things, it's arbitrary. In other words, it's not a major issue, life or death, whether your child eats at the table well or not, or whatever it might be chooses when they go to bed. It's not a matter of life and death. What you're dealing with is you're training obedience. You've got to see those daily details. Every one of them is an opportunity to train obedience. That's the goal. But you're not going to stop there. It's a period of time that they're going to grow out of. And once they've learned obedience, you will transition them to be able to submit. So that when you say to your 8 or 9-year-old, please take out the rubbish to go and get collected, or take this to the compost heap, or would you help with this, cook supper, or wash the dishes? Nobody wants to do those things. But they're able to say, yes, Mom, with a happy heart. They can submit to Mom and Dad because of something they've learned when they were younger. And then we've seen this with our daughter, not yet with our sons. I think maybe it's easier for daughters. She's at home now. She will just do a whole lot of stuff to make life easier as a 19-year-old. She will just cook supper without being asked. She'll have done the dishes. She will do things. And she does it with such a happy heart because she's honoring us in a way. So that's the transition that you are aiming for.
Just an example. So Emma, when she was little, for us as a family, we decided that we thought long term, when she's a teenager, we want her to be dressing in a way that is appropriate for a teenager. But it's quite hard if we allowed her to wear very skimpy, revealing things when she's little. It's quite hard to then change that because she doesn't know any better. So we decided that we would encourage her to be modest in a dress. So it doesn't mean that she wears... She's a girl and she loves fashion, so that's good. But we just were aware of what she was exposing because we were thinking long term. Because it's actually really cute when a 2-year-old wears something really cute, but for us it was where are we going? So the one day we were going to church and she had a growth spurt and she put on her favourite skirt that used to be here and now it was here. And I remember it was a Sunday morning and I was tired and I'd had a day, even though it was only 7 o'clock in the morning, I'd already had a day. And she put this on and I saw this skirt and I remembered where we were aiming. Our vision was long term and I just thought I haven't got the energy to deal with it. And it didn't really matter if she went skirt like dress, church like that because she was 4, like really doesn't matter, no. And so I just left it. And Richard came out and he was like, ooh, Em, I think that skirt's a little bit short. And I expected a huge, She said, okay, Dad. And she rushed in and went and found something. And then she came out and said, is this all right? And we're like, yes. It was such a beautiful thing. We'd had many arguments before then. Then, the other day, so she's 19, and she is, she can wear what she likes. I can't actually say anything. She came in with a dress. Mum, do you think this is a bit short for church? And she really wanted my opinion. And I said, I think for church just a little bit, because we've explained to her how men are wired, that they're visual, and even though there's nothing wrong and it's beautiful and you look gorgeous, it might be unhelpful to someone else. You might cause the guy behind you to sin as you bend over, and it's just, we don't want to do that. And she willingly went and chose, but what she was doing, she was honoring us. And that was a beautiful thing of actually, we saw the fruit of parenting. Years of encouraging her to wear things that were just modest.
Okay, so let's have a focus in on the first of those periods, the boundaries of 0 to 4 years. So if you can just bring up all the points at once, what was the first one? Stop there, that's fine, let's go to the first one. All right, we'll just have them all on, it's no problem. What your goal there is to establish parental authority. You are unashamedly trying to be the boss in your family. This is the one period of your parenting where, in your own heart, it's okay to have the attitude, you must obey me just because I'm mom and dad. It's 100% legitimate because your children do not yet understand authority. They're young. They're 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 years old. They haven't yet learned what it is to respect authority. So you have to teach them by requiring them to obey you. You can be very strict in this period. Not unnecessarily, not being harsh, but it's okay to have lots of boundaries because your boundaries are going to be teaching them morality. They don't yet know right from wrong. They don't even know those concepts yet. So you're going to be using the everyday moments. If you think of a child in the 0 to 4, their life revolves around eating, bathing, sleeping, dressing, and the way they play with their siblings. That's really the areas of your parental, the way you can influence them. So you want to take every one of those areas of their lives, and you're not just putting, what's the right word, arbitrary boundaries that have no meaning, but for example, when you say to your children, bedtime is going to be 7 o'clock or 6:30, whatever you decide for your young children, it's good and right that you enforce that.
Yeah.
That, you know, whether your children go to bed at 6 o'clock, 6:30, 7, 8, whatever, it's your decision. The issue is not bedtime. The issue is you are putting a boundary on the ground so that your children learn to obey. That's the issue. Likewise, when you put food on the table and require your children to sit down and eat in a high chair or whatever that might be that they're eating, they don't get to set the rules of what they eat. You do. If you put a reasonable food on the table and they want the yogurt in the fridge, they don't get the yogurt in the fridge. Not because nutritionally it really matters, it's because your word, you're trying to establish your word counts. They have to learn to obey. So you can take everything from the way they're dressing, what they play with, how they play, who they play with, whatever, the details of their lives. And when you say it's bath time, it is bath time. And not because you need clean children, but because you need children who obey your voice. That's really the goal of this thing. And at the end of the day, you end up, one of the greatest things you're trying to teach in all of this is your children to learn how to obey your voice, because one day they're going to have to obey God's voice, and secondly, to learn self-control. So a very young child has no self-control. They'll just do what they want to do, and they have to learn that actually if you touch that, for example, let's say you've got a table like this at home, your coffee table, and you've got ornaments on it. You might be tempted to take all the ornaments off your table and put them high up so that your children cannot reach them. So what you are saying is that my children do not have self-control. I'm not prepared to teach them self-control, so I'm going to take everything that's tempting and put it out the way. Right? Now, understandably, if you have a family heirloom that's worth thousands, show some wisdom, okay? Put it out of control.
And poisonous chemicals.
And poisonous chemicals and all the rest of it. But everything else, having a table of temptation is the best thing you can have for your children. Because a 2-year-old has to learn that when they put their hand out to grab that, whatever it might be, the TV remote or your car keys, and you have to have the parental energy to say, don't touch. And if they do touch, to follow through with however you follow through, maybe a smack on the hand or whatever it might be that you would do. They have to learn that self-control, that they can't just do that. They can't just reach out and grab. That's the greater lesson. Likewise, if they're eating and they're just sort of throwing food everywhere and smearing it over their bodies as 1-year-olds and 2-year-olds, that constant reminder, squeeze their hand, don't do that, put your hands on the side of the thing. It's not about food and mess. Those are not the issues. The issue is it's that programming of the brain, and I don't just get to do what I want to do. That's what you're aiming for. We have, tell me about Brian and Amy.
Okay, so Brian and Amy, the couple who now lead our church, yay! They've got Benji, a 2-year-old, and he is just too gorgeous, and he's full of vuma. What's that? What's the Afrikaans word? He's got lots of character. And they've been trying to stop him from touching things. So he came in and he saw our electronic area, and it is at that height. And we were all talking, the hi-fi with all the lights, etc. And we were talking as a group, and Richard noticed that he went up to this thing, and he stood and he looked at it.
And just to point out, they had done this many times.
Yeah, this was.
Don't touch the hi-fi, all the lights. Don't touch the hi-fi.
And it's like bees to a honeypot. And he looked, and then Richard saw his hand go out, and no one was watching him. And then he went, no. And then he was like, and then he just had to touch it. But the beauty was, he was 18 months at the time, the beauty was that he was starting on the journey of learning self-control. And they're doing such a good job. And you know what? It is exhausting.
Yeah.
But it's worth it because it's that thing of when you're 20 or 40 and you're in your room, you just have to click.
That's what you're aiming
That's
for.
what we're aiming for. This is not about the food and the sleep and the clean. It's nothing. It's about the bigger
One day,
picture.
if you think of the freedoms we have in this generation, what is it going to be like in 10 years' time? Honestly, I fear for our next generation of the temptations they're going to face. So the reality is the world is not child-proof. It isn't. And they have to learn self-control. This is so worth fighting for. Just to carry on about this importance of self-control. Although I love training dogs as a hobby, so a lot of my illustrations are dog training illustrations. Apart from just the value, the rightness of self-control, there was an incredible study done in New Zealand where they tracked 1,000 children from a young age, when they were still puppies, 0 to 4-year-old, 5-year-old, and in a variety of families, socioeconomic situations, and they tracked them right up until their 30s, and they measured a whole lot of what you might call worldly measures of success. How much did they earn? What crime rates, addictions, weight, all these sort of things that they had, educational level. And those children who were taught self-control, the question was asking, what are the benefits when you teach self-control to young children? How does that track through life? And the statistics are unbelievably, you don't need to be, it's not fine little levels of detail. The children, if you have used self-control as a young child, you're like 3 times less likely to go to jail, for example. In other words, self-control and criminal activity is a huge thing. Health problems. If you lack self-control, you're like 5 times more likely to have health problems. People who have self-control typically earn double what people who don't have self-control earn. Every measure of life, even from a worldly point of view, if you can train your children to have self-control, it's an incredible foundation for their future that you want to aim for. So I say that because as parents of young children, particularly if you've got more than one under the age of 3 or 4, it's really hard work. Honestly, it's exhausting because they do not learn it quickly. And it's every day. It's like, why? I told you this yesterday. In fact, I told you this half an hour ago. Why are you doing this? Because they're not programmed yet. They haven't been taught it, and it's layer upon layer. It's word after word. It's smacking that hand for the 4th time when they've reached out and taken the biscuits off the table. It'll be so much easier to lift the biscuits and put them out of reach. But think long term. Think long term, and that's the value of what you do.
And if you're having a bad day, just don't have any biscuits around.
Just undermine everything else.
No, I have to tell you, we're real. So the one day, I had 4 children under the age of 6. Richard had gone away on business, and he'd gone away for the whole week. And I think it was about Thursday, and I was just trying to stay sane and keep my children alive. And in those days, we used to put them to bed really early. It just suited our rhythms. I think I needed more sleep and more time alone. So their bedtime was 6 o'clock in the evening. I know it sounds terrible, but anyway, it was for my sanity. Okay? And they wake up at 5, that's why. So it was about 5:15, and I thought, I am not going to make 6 o'clock. I'm going to sin terribly. It's going to be bad. So, but Emma and Thomas, the older two, knew what 6 o'clock looked like on the kitchen clock. So, when they were out the room, I quickly went in and turned it back forward for half an hour. I did, true story. And then I was like, okay. So then I said, guys, it's 5 minutes. Remember we taught you the 5-minute rule? You said 5 minutes for bedtime. And I remember them playing and looking outside. It didn't look like it's not like it. And they said, are you sure it's 6 o'clock? I said, yes. Emma jumps up, runs into the kitchen. Oh, it's 5 to 6. Okay, and they went to bed, but...
You do not advocate sinning and lying to your children.
Kept them alive.
Okay. Last point on self-control is a scripture where it says, like a city whose walls are broken down is the man who lacks self-control. And, you know, that is just the reality. Is we must know, and I say this confidently in a group of Christians here, is that we have an enemy in the form of Satan who is going to try and attack our children. And the one thing that really will help them in life is this self-control. And it's not just self-control in terms of the temptation to sin. I mean, that obviously includes that. But it's also self-control of your emotions. So that's something we're going to talk about in a moment. Your behavior, your desires. It's that package. But you know, how many of us know people, you might even struggle with this yourself, control of your own emotions. Anger bursts out, or overwhelming sort of self-pity, or whatever it might be. You know, it's actually unhelpful if you do not have control of your emotions. Yeah. So all of this whole package of self-control is an incredible gift to our children. It is so, so worth fighting for. And we will...
because as we know, something, if you take anger in a 2-year-old, if they've never taught self-control through their ages, they become an angry 40-year-old, which is a whole lot more destructive than a 2-year-old. So rather be strict now so that you can send children into marriages that are fruitful and a blessing to their partners.
So I've alluded to this a little bit, but I just want to re-emphasize a few points here. So the question you ask yourself is, how do you build a solid bridge out of liquid concrete? So we've got Martin in the back there as a civil engineer, so he would know something of these things. But I mean, you think of a bridge like this, and it's an incredibly, I mean a bridge like that, which is going to carry incredible weight over those few pillars, and the strength lies in the concrete. Okay, but how do you make that? And if you've ever worked with concrete, thanks. You basically have to build a temporary structure that you pour the concrete into while it's liquid. The liquid concrete has no strength. So you have to have something that is going to have the strength. We call it shuttering. And you build this wooden frame or metal frame, and then you pour the concrete in, more and more concrete, and then you allow it a period of time to set, and then you throw away or use elsewhere the wooden shuttering. So I'm sure you're familiar with it. You've probably seen it all around you. Now, that's exactly how you're going to see your parenting of the young years. Like I was saying, those boundaries, what they eat, when they eat, where they sleep, what they wear, when they bath, what they're allowed to touch, what they're not allowed to touch. Any one of those boundaries is not the issue. It's just it's an unimportant issue. And whether you did it like that or whether you did it like this, it has no morality attached to it. So the point of it is, though, just like the shuttering is not the main thing, it's a required step in getting the main thing, the pillar of strength. So what you are trying to do when you put in place a seemingly arbitrary boundary, and you might be thinking, why am I doing this? You know, what am I? And other friends and family members will be saying, why are you so strict with your children? Honestly, we've had that question, like, why is this an issue? Just let them play, just let them do this, just let them be. There's going to be a question that comes your way. And in your own mind, you're going to have your resolve will be diminished, will be attacked. Because you're thinking, when you're tired, oh my word, why am I doing this again? Think of it as shuttering. The piece of wood is not the issue, but it's needed for a short season of time. Just to hold until that concrete has set. Because once it sets, then you can release it. And you throw the shuttering away and you find, actually you don't need to tell your 7 or 8-year-old what time to go to bed. You don't need to do it because they've got something inside them set already. So I want to encourage you to see all of those daily routines that you are going to try and get control of as the shuttering needed for something. And you know, the reality is if you release the shuttering too soon and you put weight too soon on concrete, it's messy. It's exactly the same principle with parenting. If you allow your children freedoms too soon, they can't carry the weight of that freedom. They can't. They're too mushy, and it actually can be quite destructive for that. So you don't want to allow life to happen too soon for a young child. That's the whole thing. Self-control is when the concrete has set. If you allow a freedom in before the concrete is set, it gets messy.
So I want to encourage you. Last night I spoke about our one son Thomas, who's 17 now, and he was the guy who I said I almost felt like I needed to give him a spanking before he even woke up in the morning in lieu of what he was going to do for that day,
Preemptive punishment.
And he doesn't remember any of his hidings at all. We stopped at about 5 or 6 with him because that was when our boundaries were very tight, and then we let go. So he was feisty. He had, passion and didn't want to listen to me. He was openly rebellious. And when he was 15, Richard's sister gave him a tablet for his birthday, which we said was fine because we'd seen self-control, so we were happy for him to have one. And at the beginning of the year, he came into my room and he said, "Here, Mom, you can have my tablet." I was like, "Why?" He said, "This is unhelpful. It's just such a time waster. It's not adding value to my life. I don't need this." I was like, "Oh my goodness. I've got less self-control than this lad in so many areas of my life." It's a true story. And then he also said, just out of, he wasn't trying to brag, he was just almost out of just thing, he had deleted all the games off his phone. I'm like, why? No, it's school time now, and I just find it such a distraction to have all these things like PUBG and Fortnite on my phone, so I'm just taking them off, and in the holidays I'll reload them, then I can play. But we didn't say that, we haven't asked him to, so this is the fruit of being, and we were labelled exceptionally strict, controlling of our 0 to 5-year-olds. But all I can say is I'm so glad I was in hindsight, because I'm seeing beautiful fruit that was worth it.
And they don't remember it. That was the key. Okay, so next slide then. So there are entire industries. If you go into a child shop, whatever, not parent, where you can buy prams and nappies and that one. What a shop like that? One of those shops. You will find entire shelving on how to child-proof your home. Okay, things that lock cupboards, hold toilet seats down, stop the toilet roll disappearing, endless things like that. Because children are very destructive. So at the end of the day, our advocation, our advice would be, within the reasons of health and safety and maybe extreme loss of things, don't do this. Don't allow those temptations to lie around your house. When you're putting out chips and sweets for your guests, when you come, put them on a low table so that you have to parent. When you put a bowl of sweets down and the kids, all wanting to get their, young kids want to get their hands in there, that's a parenting moment you want to create so that you can teach them right from wrong and to teach them not to just grab. And it's exhausting, but it's so worth it. Put your TV remotes where the children can play with them and then parent them. I would maybe suggest don't do your car keys, because the cost of replacing an expensive remote or many times if they go into the toilet, it's just a reality. But you obviously show wisdom in this and don't put the rat poison where they can eat it. But it's just allow them have everything in the cupboards that they can open a cupboard, and then you have to say no. You may not unpack the cupboard, and whatever it is. Don't child-proof your home, would be my suggestion.
One of the things, I don't know if you guys have it here, but you can have a system in your Wi-Fi where it locks down at a certain time. It's called something. That one.
You get a home-proofing Wi-Fi system.
Wi-Fi, so it only starts at 8 in the morning, shuts down at 9, and then you can monitor, and then your children are only allowed so much Wi-Fi access, and when it's up, it's up. Which is the adult version of that. You haven't taught them self-control, but actually, I shouldn't be doing this in my bedroom at night or whatever. They should need to have self-control because one day they're going to leave home. And if they can't have self-control in the safety of home where it's okay to make a mistake and it's okay to slip up and it's okay to not get it right, and where you're going to love them and disciple them and help them, they're going to be tickets out there. So that's why we advocate that. We have a strict policy with our phones, is that the children are only allowed to use them in an open space. So, last time I spoke, our kids have half an hour of free screen time and they can play any game. It has to be done in a public area. All interaction with a device has to be in a public area. Our home computer is in a space where everyone walks past all the time. You can't have anything on the screen without being seen. That's just a helpful thing, but it's to teach.
That's wisdom, because some of the consequences as you allow freedom, it's a bit like rat poison. So in other words, if your young child accidentally eats a poison, that's devastating. And likewise with things of the internet, a single click can be a hook. Literally a 7 or 8 year old seeing a naked woman or a naked man or a sexual act on a video is a hook that Satan gets in there and they can be pulled off course. They see, so it's quite the internet is a very dangerous area. So we don't, even for our, as I say, teenagers, we don't just allow them to go and sit in a room and stare at a screen, because accidentally they might get hooked. So it's better that they would be just doing that in a public space. But the long and the short of it is, don't ever replace an opportunity for self-control with a physical solution like a cable tie or having moved something to a high level. Because the other thing is, at some point your children go to somebody else's home. Granny's home, and her ornaments are all on the table, or your friends, and their remotes are all there, and the hi-fi's there, and the TV. You know, at the end of the day, you want to be able to take your children into any environment, and they actually know how to behave. So, for example, you know, if your children are allowed to climb on the furniture at home, it's very difficult to say don't climb on the furniture in somebody else's house, because they're used to that. They'll just climb over the couch and jump on the couch and come off. And you know, that might be fine for you, but it may not be fine for those people. So think in terms of the bigger picture of the world, and just put in place reasonable boundaries of behavior that say, actually, you have to, it's lovely to jump on the couch, but there's a trampoline actually outside, or whatever it is that you can go and jump on. And because the world is not childproof, that's the bottom line.
And it can be done. So I did manage to do it with my 4. I remember going to a friend's house to have a coffee table, and the kids love teaspoons and hot tea. It was a low one. And so I was a very proactive parent, so I knew I was going to someone's house. So I have a bucket of toys that I keep in my car that are only for when we go out for special occasions. And it was random stuff, so I didn't spend money. It was like old bottles with stones in, you know, it's just stuff that you find. And that would come out, and I'd always have a mat. And if I was going into a situation where I knew there would be a temptation to want to touch, etc., so for my sanity actually, not theirs, I would bring out my picnic blanket and the toys, and I would prime them before. And I say, okay, we're going to Nancy's house today, and there's probably going to be stuff that you're not allowed to touch, so then I'd proactively parent them and say, you may not touch anything, this is going to be the consequence, and we'd run it through, and they'd all go, yes, Mum, and there'd be this whole long thing, and then we'd go, and I'd say, I want you to stay on the mat, or if we're in the garden, you can play. So it's not like they couldn't have fun, but it was just when we were around the coffee table, there was something else for them to do, because it's unfair. You've got a 4-year-old, and you're making them just sit on the couch and listen to boring adult talk, and you don't help them to be 4-year-olds. 4-year-olds are 4-year-olds. So it's just being proactive, thinking ahead of that situation and how you're going to deal with it. And
on a last note on proactive parenting. So you're going to have some children who can do this quite easily, and others where this is a great battle. The battles of self-control are difficult for some to win. And so let's say, for example, there's a situation, let's just say at the granny's house, and she's got all of her ornaments, and there's one of your children that just cannot resist touching the ornaments. The proactive parenting would be to help your child before they get there, deal with that situation. So it's just to even point out to them on the way there, you would say, now we're going to Granny's house, and I know you love to touch those things, but just remember, you're not allowed to. You don't just sort of wait for them to fall into, in a sense, error. You would teach them on the way and coach them on the way there so that they know what's that they've got to get this battle processed in their hearts and try and be ahead of the game. Okay, then I also want to speak a little bit about choice within this. So this is still in the young age group, 0 to 4 or 5-year-olds, even 7 or 8, maybe up to that age.
But it can be used also in teens. This is the principle that goes.
Yeah, this principle you can apply at any point in your parenting. The bottom line is, when you're being quite strict, the risk of this is that if you have a child who is naturally a bit more rebellious, you are constantly battling with your child. In other words, it's always a battle of them fighting against the boundaries, and it can lead to a great amount of frustration in the family. So this is where choice can be a great sort of diffuser of warfare. Because what you can do is you can still put a boundary in place, but within the boundary you give choice. So in other words, it might be, for example, okay, we're having fruit for breakfast. We're not having chocolate-flavored Pro-Nutro. Having fruit for breakfast, but you can choose between apples and bananas. So now suddenly, in a child's mind, they're not thinking, oh my word, I've been so hard done by, I'm not allowed chocolate from Nutro. They're now deciding whether or not they want apples or bananas. And just by allowing some choice, you diffuse the moment of potential rebellion.
Another example is, I don't know if you had it, but I did, where they're determined to wear something, and then they can't make up their mind, and you're rushing now. So for example, Sunday morning was always a battle of getting people ready for church, with getting them dressed, because now they don't want to wear what you think they should wear. So what I did to leave it, so proactive parenting was the night before, I'd say, okay, we're going to church fine. What are you going to wear? And then we'd go to the cupboard, this particularly for my daughter. You can't wear your pajamas and all that stuff, and your sandpit stuff. But here, you can make a choice out of this side. What are you going to wear? And then they can choose. And if it's the wrong color, it doesn't matter. But they've chosen something that's vaguely appropriate. You put it out and say, tomorrow, this is what you're going to wear. And it just diffuses a potential situation. But they've allowed some choice that they can wear that top with that skirt or whatever.
And as they get older, you know, when you are putting in place a boundary for a slightly older child, you can still phrase it as a choice. In other words, if they choose to step over the boundary and there's now a consequence that they don't like, the bottom line is they chose that, and you can express it like that. You are choosing between staying within the boundaries, or you're choosing to step out of the boundaries, and you've chosen this consequence. And
just an example, we recently, and we mentioned last night, one of our children struggles a bit with anger, and then he lashes out and physically hurts someone. And so we had said, if that happens, you have a choice. You can either have this or this if you do that. And then they lashed out at someone at church, the pastor's children bashing someone else. It happens. But then it was like, I was so heartsore because now he had two choices that were really awful. But anyway, it was his choice. And then as a mum, I could say, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you did that. Now you've got to choose. It worked. He hasn't done it since. It was a hard choice. And it was good.
There was a book we read, it was actually written by Danny Silk from Bethel on parenting. And he
It's an excellent book, Loving Your Kids on Purpose. If you've ever read it, it's worth reading.
Worth reading. He would always express his instructions to his teenage children, or not express it, but they would have a choice. So, for example, if they wanted to, they might have a chore to do around the house, the washing up or whatever it might be, taking the rubbish out, and he would only speak once. Please take the rubbish out. Reasonable request. If they didn't do it, he would do it. But he would charge them out of their pocket money his consulting rate. And one time he went into his, I think his teenage, I might have the story slightly wrong, but he went into his teenage son's bedroom, which was an absolute disaster zone. It hadn't been tidied in days and weeks, stuff everywhere, and there's the teenager sitting on the on the bed reading, listening to music and reading a novel, and he said to his son, please tidy up the room. And so the son sort of like, carry on reading the book. Half an hour later he came back in, and the room is still in a disaster zone. So he started just packing stuff away. This is the dad, picking everything up, putting things in a bag, and he basically took everything that his son really valued, or some of the things that his son really valued. Yeah, I think he had an Xbox, PlayStation, the computer game thing. He took that and he sold it to pay for the time of him cleaning the bedroom. He said he did it once. He's never had a problem. But the thing is, he didn't get into a fight, he wasn't arguing, and he didn't speak again. He gave one instruction, a reasonable instruction, and then he basically, the son had to choose. Yeah. So this choice. I will do it for you, but you must know it's going to come at a cost. and that's actually what life is like, isn't it? And that is life. And it's not a bad thing to do that.
So it's also first time obedience that we're teaching last night. So he spoke once, a reasonable request that obviously had an upfront discussion that if I ask you to do something and you don't do it, it's going to come at a cost, my time. But he then was consistent. Because remember last night I spoke about communication, consistency and consequences. So he obviously communicated upfront. He was then consistent. He did it. And then there was a consequence and he lost his Xbox.
So there you have it. It's a good thing to be a strict parent. Honestly, it is. Don't be shy. Okay, so that was the younger years. guys all right? Or do you want a leg stretch? Yeah, quick leg stretch, okay? Toilet break, stretch your legs. We'll do the next age group, and then we'll have tea. Okay.
Yeah, it's like standing up.
Okay, let's get going again.
Next January. Those are more cost of 5, 5, 6, 6. More power.
Alright, so let's, I don't think my voice is loud enough to get into the toilet. Right, so that was all good. Young years, it's okay to be strict. Oh, you guys are just pulling on water all over the place. So what we want to do now is to move into the next section or next sort of period of parenting, which are the 4 to 12-year-olds. So we call this one the training years. And what you are, and just to remind you that these are not strict boundaries. In fact, you do a bit of everything in all the ages, but we just try to categorize it to what you'll mainly be doing in this time.
You can't actually categorize, because if you think about it, you probably know some 30-year-olds who act like 12-year-olds. And you probably know some 18-year-olds that are so wise beyond their years and they act like 40-year-olds. So you can't box people, but these are just...
They're just ways to teach
Yeah.
at the end of the day. So what you're trying to do, if you can just put up the points there, is in this period is you are populating a moral database. That's the way I put it. I'll speak a lot more about the detail of this, but this is really the summary. This is their knowledge of right and wrong. It's like having a computer database of knowing why you're going to behave, the way you're going to behave, what is right, what is wrong. And I don't know if you've ever had children in this age group. They use the word why a lot. Why this? Why that? Why? Endless questions. And it's a very natural thing in that age group to try to understand. They're starting to realize they've emerged from just where their world is just food, sleep, and friends and play, and they're actually starting to realize there's a bigger world around them, and they very naturally will start to question a whole lot of things. And it's very normal, and you would want to be teaching into that open mind, that sponge that is ready to absorb everything that you know about the world. And just again, to say it, your children have been placed in your family. So your responsibility as the parent is to transfer everything you know about right and wrong into their hearts in this period. So that by the time they emerge from this, in a sense, they have picked up your heart in life as best you can. You are not perfect. You do not have perfect doctrine. You do not understand the scriptures well enough. You do not know God fully, but it's okay. What you do know, make sure they know it by the end of this period.
And the thing is, if we aren't the loudest voice in our children's lives, someone else will be, and it might be something that you're actually not quite happy with. So it's good to be very intentional in this season of being the ones who put right and wrong into their hearts, not someone else.
You have spent much of the previous years establishing self-control and requiring them to obey you and all the boundaries you put in place and shuttering. So they will be starting to emerge from that period. So you will be still requiring them to exercise self-control, but they should be exhibiting some of it by now. So they won't be rushing up and grabbing things off the table and playing with the TV remote. They will have occasional lapses of that. It's perfectly normal. The kids will not be perfect. So in other words, that shuttering sort of comes and goes, and it might be that you are having to draw in the boundaries a little bit more if they're not showing self-control, and then it gets released again. So it's in a period of flexibility there. You are reinforcing self-control and just making sure it's sort of being built on again and again. And then very significantly, you want to be what I call elevating the good. In other words, you will be seeing at this stage in your children's lives aspects of goodness. They will be showing kindness to their siblings. They will be not all the time, but they will be showing signs of it, and self-control and patience and hard work and all of the rest of that. Those first fruits are coming through at this point. And as proactive parents, just remember what I said last night about you don't want your parenting conversation to be always on the negative. And so really what you want to be saying, you want to be hearing things like this coming out of your mouth. Son or daughter, Johnny, whatever your name is, I just love the way you showed self-control in that situation. So you might have seen something, they did something, or they didn't do something, and they showed self-control. Speak about it to them, speak about it to them in front of their siblings or their friends, or it might be, I saw how you were so kind, or I love the way you guys are playing so nicely together. Speak about the good that you're seeing, because that bears fruit much more than trying to squash the bad.
And what we celebrate corporately in your family is the culture that emerges. So if you are celebrating goodness, celebrating self-control, celebrating good character, that is the culture that comes around. Even in a church community, if someone's standing up here and celebrating, seeing God move and do miracles, it builds faith for people to go, oh, well, maybe I can do that. It's what we celebrate corporately as a family is what will become the culture.
So make sure there's enough positive in your words, because that is what will come. That's the fruit that will emerge. We don't want to just be weeding the garden. We also want to be planting the right stuff. Okay, so how do we do all of this? I just want to speak a little bit about establishing morality in children and what that actually looks like. So morality is the standard of right and wrong. Now, in the world today, the cultures across the world today, a lot of the societal standards of right and wrong are being questioned and are falling away. And in fact, you'll often hear statements like, there are no absolutes of right and wrong. I can do what I want so long as it doesn't affect somebody else. So we get into this moral sort of relativism. It's okay for me, it's not okay for you, and effectively it takes God completely out the picture, because as Christians we would hold to the truth that God has a say on everything in life. He has an opinion, and his opinion is the very definition of right and wrong. So if God calls it wrong, then it's wrong. If God calls it right, then it's right. That's for us, our understanding of morality is basically the world as God sees it. Now, we don't have a full understanding of that. I mean, we have the revelations of Scripture and our best understanding of it, and each one of us carries to a degree that in our hearts. But I think we must be very confident to be able to make absolute statements of right and wrong to our children and teach them that, train this, teach them to our children. We must know that the cultures around us are not teaching that. So do not expect the schooling system of the day to teach this to your children. So this is a parental responsibility. I think in the past, schools did teach morality, but nowadays I think less and less we can rely on that, and they may indeed, we're certainly seeing this in South Africa. I mean, I don't know, I think Zim is a little bit more of a conservative culture than we are, but we are seeing literally in our schools today, in Maritzburg, which is actually quite a conservative city, schools where they are openly advocating bisexuality, teaching, the curriculums are teaching our children to explore their sexuality from a young age and making provision for bisexuality and
There's schools in Joburg that no longer have male and female toilets at school, so you have unisex loos.
Which in itself is, I mean, that's not the issue. The point is they just say to the children, it's fine to explore. You can, maybe you want to try a homosexual relationship, it's okay. So the point of it is we cannot rely at all on society to hold to the truth of what we understand the truth to be. And I would just again say, you know in your heart what is right and wrong. Be confident to teach it to your children. Make a stand, because if we don't, as Christians, make a stand, the world is going to fall apart, actually, because it's right that we would know this. Okay.
And if you wanted to, like in your heart, you feel that is right or wrong, but you're not too sure how to back it up with scripture, ask. Ask your church community, ask your leaders, ask your home group people, your connect groups. Ask. It's okay to ask questions. You know, I think sometimes as Christians we feel, I mustn't question, you know. It's okay to genuinely ask why.
Okay, so how do we do this? If we look at this, the central skill that you want to get right in your, if you go to the next slide there, is always explain the heart motive behind any one of your instructions, the how to behave, as I call them. So often at this stage we are still correcting our children's behavior, and we're saying do this, don't do that, eat properly, sit nicely, dress appropriately, don't watch that, watch this. You know, their life is still a series of instructions guiding our children's behavior, because they're still quite young children. But what you're going to be doing now, and you can even start this at a much younger age, always explain why you're giving an instruction. So don't resort, unless it's an absolute last resort, to the temptation to say, I told you, just because I told you. That's an insufficient instruction. In other words, there's value in it. In other words, you can just give an instruction and you expect them to obey just because I told you, but you haven't taught them anything. So this is an age of teaching. So now you need to say, it's important that so let's just take an example. In our culture, when our children are, we would require, if our children are sitting in a room, say watching TV, and an older person would walk in, let's say my mother would come over and walk into the room, we would expect our children to pause their video, stand up, go and greet Granny, and as a sign of respect. It is not appropriate to keep sort of lying on the couch and sort of like just waiting, while watching TV. That wouldn't be showing respect. So when we were teaching this, it's not just, we wouldn't just say, oh, stand up and greet Granny. We would have take the time to explain, a minute or two to explain why this is important. Again and again and again, you are teaching, you're going to explain the moral reason why they should behave the way you want them to do. You can apply this to any aspect of behavior. So why is it important that they should eat properly at the table? Why is it important that they should dress appropriately? Don't just say the skirt's too short or the tank top or whatever it is. Explain your heart, because if you think about it, let's say your daughter emerges, your 7-year-old daughter is going to church and she comes out and she's wearing those things and a short skirt, because they're just her favourite clothes. She's not making a fashion statement, they're just her favourite clothes that she's allowed to run around at home. But in your heart you go, it's not great for church. Okay? So the temptation would be to say, you've got to put on those clothes. But if you don't get down, in a sense, to her level and explain why is it, as best you can to a 7-year-old, you haven't taught anything. You haven't filled her heart. You haven't started to train her.
A good analogy is to think of a filing cabinet, those old steel filing cabinets. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to put files into the filing cabinet. Our children arrive with an empty filing cabinet, and now we're trying to say, okay, well, when it comes to respect for older people, this is how we do it. But you have to explain why you must stand up when Granny comes in, why you give your chair to an older lady, why you let someone older than you go to the front of the queue. You need to explain it. Each time you explain it, you're putting another file in, another file in, another file in, until their database, their filing system is completely full, so that when they are catching a bus to school and you're not around, and an older person comes onto the bus and there are no seats, they suddenly go through their filing cabinet and go, oh, there's something about older people, I remember mom and dad telling me. They open the drawer, they go through, they pull out the file. Oh yes, the reason why is because I respect this lady because she's older than me, so I'm going to offer her my chair. So you are filling that filing cabinet every time you explain why. So when your 5-year-old is driving around the bend because it's, why mommy, why daddy, just think, I'm filling the filing cabinet, I'm filling the filing cabinet, this is good. Because if you don't fill it, the world will fill it. And their filing system is very different.
Yeah. So don't give in to just giving short instructions, as tempting as it is. Always explain what you're doing, why you're doing it. Just another example, and I'm thinking of more sort of diverse examples. Let's say, for example, we after church will often have tea and coffee together, and we have several older folk in our church, and the children love to just like rush through the crowd. They might even have their bikes, new bikes, and they're tearing around. But actually, when you look at the world through the eyes of an older person, they sort of go into the tea table. It's very intimidating having lots of children running around, because if they knock you and you fall, there's real consequences. So there's something about, as a parent, you might just be tempted to say, okay kids, go and play on the field, all right? Which is not a bad instruction, and the kids will probably just obey you happily. But actually you've missed the opportunity to explain why. So rather get the kids around and literally do this. You say, guys, you see that lady who's over there like that on her walker? When you guys were riding past her, did you notice how she was like really scared that you'd knock her over? Because when you're an older person, you really worry about those things. So therefore, go and play over there. So you just take the time. It's all about time. Take the time to explain yourself. Because in your mind, it's just a quick decision. But actually, when you unpack it, there will be, behind every instruction you give, there is an unpacking that you could do, which would explain why you gave the instruction. Think about it and then teach your children.
So one of the things we felt as a family is that God has asked us to travel a lot to different nations and different homes to encourage people and to be used by Him. So we just thought we want our children to be a blessing, and one of the frustrating things is when you go to someone's house and they've spent all day preparing a beautiful meal, and then your 5-year-old goes, I don't eat that. And it's so disrespectful, and like a 5-year-old can get away with it, but a 13-year-old can't, because then it starts looking cheeky. So we just had a policy from day one that we don't have fussy eaters, and we always explain why, because God has called us to the nations, and we want to be a people who can eat anything, anywhere, and be grateful, because we want to add value and want to respect people and say thank you. So we just wouldn't allow them. So when there was a piece of broccoli on the plate and they refused to eat it, we'd say, we don't have any fussy eaters because we want to be a blessing to the nations, to other people, so you will eat that piece of broccoli. Within reason, obviously, but there was just this principle of no fussy eaters because that was the reason why.
So, worth fighting for, once again. I think a very big part of this, if you know the next one, you've got it there, well done. Head of the game, well done. Quick, off the mark. Is lead by example. So, sometimes you'll see in family homes, they'll have a list of a poster saying, this is who we are as a family, like examples up there, we are a family who want to, we're not going to hit, we're going to be kind and keep your hand, and you have all these sort of things that people like to think that they are, family of hope and love and laughter and all the rest of it. Great value system, not a bad thing. But we must know that our children are observing our behavior. Well, there's two aspects. There's our public lives, what we see and what they see of us. So, for example, you'll find if you are giving instructions to your children about being kind, or don't speak to your brother like that. Yeah, don't argue with your brother like that. But then later that night you're arguing with your wife like that. Your voice carries no authority if you are not leading by example publicly in terms of what your children can see. If your expectation is that you don't want your children to lie, and then, for example, somebody phones that you don't want to speak to, and your child's like, oh, Dad, Joe is phoning you. Oh, just tell him I'm not here. and if effectively you undermine everything that you're wanting to your children to do. So think quite carefully about what you're modeling in your life, in your family.
There's a Bob Mumford from years back, he had a preach where he said, if I've got chicken pox and I preach measles, you're not gonna catch measles. I'm preaching about how you're gonna release the symptoms of measles, but I'm actually carrying chicken pox. You're gonna catch what I'm carrying. You're not gonna catch. And it's a thing of do as I do, don't do what I say. So if we are saying one thing but doing something else, our children are going to do what we do. They're not going to do what we say.
And I think this also goes behind the scenes to our private world, because I'm not quite sure how this all works, but I honestly believe there is a spiritual dynamic that takes place in the spiritual world. So if you are, in a sense, privately living in contradiction to one of the own things that you'd like to see your children living in. So let's say, for example, you don't want to see your children stealing, but you are not paying your tax or doing whatever else behind the scenes. I think you undermine spiritually the authority you have to speak into that area. So that doesn't mean to say we have to be these perfect people, because we're not perfect. We do have sin in our lives. But as much as you can get control of your life and speak into an area, it's helpful to do that, to be able to speak into an area. So if you want to see patience in your children, exercise it in your own life. Kindness, self-control, all of those things. There really is a reality to that. Give them a good example. Okay, so that was morality, which is really around the standards of right and wrong. So to summarize it, you want it to be teachers at the moment of teaching your children right from wrong, and as best you can. But if you think about it, you can have a knowledge of right and wrong and not exercise it. Okay, so like Sheila's example of the filing cabinet, you might come into a situation and you see something and you scrounge through very quickly you think about it and you realize that actually there's an appropriate way to behave, and then you choose not to do it. Okay, you can override what you know of right and wrong, and the aspect of that deals with that is your conscience. Your conscience will access that database and give you an instruction and say this is how to behave. So the example of the bus, if you think about it, you might be sitting on a bus somewhere and an older lady gets in and you think, I know it's right that I give her my seat. So you have the knowledge, but you don't listen to your knowledge. You don't get off the bum. And so that's your conscience. So if you put up the pictures there, there's two pieces of meat I'll put on the table there. How do you like your conscience done? The scriptures put it like this. Okay? You can either have a nice, medium rare rump steak, or the right hand piece is it looks like a lump of charcoal, but it's an overcooked steak. All right? And the scriptures literally describe this. If you go and read the early chapters of the book of Romans, it describes what happens to a human if they ignore their conscience. And God says He gives them over to a seared conscience. Basically, searing is when you overcook the meat and it just gets this hard, crusty exterior and becomes uneatable, inedible. And you'll know this from your own life. If you choose to ignore your conscience, that voice, that inner voice, it becomes easier to ignore it the next time, and easier to ignore it the next time, and eventually that voice just dies away. So if you constantly override what you know to be true and good and right, and you ignore that voice, which is in some ways it's a combination of your knowledge of right and wrong and the prompting of the Holy Spirit working together, trying to lead you in the paths of righteousness. If you ignore it again and again and again, God says, I will give you over to your heart. You'll get your way. You can have it, but trust me, you don't want it. It's a seared conscience. It's a very unfruitful place. And we certainly don't want that for our children. So what we want to see, the language we use, because conscience is a big word for children, and even for ourselves, we're not entirely sure what it really means, but we can have this concept of listen to your heart. Listen to that inner voice. Our children seem to pick it up quite from a young age, 3 or 4 or 5 years old. We'd be saying, what is your heart telling you? And we'd be like, what you did there, what did you think God would use that language? What did you think God would have you do? Oh no, I shouldn't have hit my brother. So we would say, listen to your heart. And this is just to give an example of this. Go ahead, love.
So our daughter, when she was little, she was really sensitive about what she watched. So we decided to go with that. Obviously God's given her real sensitivity. We don't want to override that and get her conscience seared so that she got all hardened. So we proactively said to her, if you're ever in a situation where someone is watching a movie and you go to a friend's house and they're watching a movie that you know, you just listen to your heart. And then we gave her some tools of what to do, because it's all very well going, oh, I mustn't watch this, I mustn't watch this. But then they need a way out. You need to give your children an escape route. So we said, well, these are some options. You could chat to your friend and say, no, I don't want to watch this, can we watch something else? Or you could, if you're in a whole group of friends, it's awkward to say that, so then you could just say, you can leave the room and then maybe go find the mom and say, can I go play with something else? Can I colour in what? And we gave her some options. And we saw this artwork in a way. She went to a junior youth group. She was about 8 years old, and they were watching a Christian movie. There's nothing wrong with it, but for her, she was disturbed by something that she saw. And she remembered, oh, Mum and Dad said I must listen to my heart. So she went to go and find the mum who was overseeing it, and she said, please can I go and colour in? I don't want to watch, I'm scared. And when I arrived to fetch her at 8 o'clock at night, there she was in the kitchen, colouring in, very happy, and everyone else was watching the movie. And so we'd given her a trapdoor of how to get out of a situation like that, and it really was so beautiful to see it in action. And she didn't feel silly, she didn't feel ashamed, and then on the way back, we just did the whole thing of positive consequence. We affirmed her, we raved about her, we told her how amazing she was. When I got home, I said in front of her, Dad, can you believe what Emma did? She listened to her heart, she felt a niggle about the movie, and then we just celebrated it. And then in times past, we would then go, remember that night, Em, when you listened to your heart? Remember, you can do that anytime. We kept on referring to her win. It really was a win.
And sometimes as parents, we can be tempted to say things like this to our children. We'll be watching a movie, and they're like, the children are, even as I said, there might be nothing wrong with the movie, but you can see, or they might say, oh, I'm a bit scared. We might be tempted to say, oh, no, it's fine, just like push through, in other words, just grow up. But actually, that's a lesser issue.
Yeah.
Rather turn the movie off and say, I just love the way you listen to your heart. Well done. Let's go and do something else together. And stop that moment, because the issue is never the movie, or sometimes it can be, but even for like The Lion King, something like
it was Nemo. Do you remember the old Nemo? That shark.
Finding Nemo.
Terrifying my kids.
It's not about whether or not you agree that the movie. The thing that you want to celebrate is that they listened to their hearts.
Yeah.
And
we had a situation where they were older now, so one of our sons was at a family member's house, and this person loves history, and they are a historian, and she decided that the boys needed to be well educated, and they needed to watch these old movies of Roman Empire and battle scenes, and they were quite gory. So my one child, he listened to his heart, started feeling uncomfortable, and said, Gran, I don't want to watch that. And she said, this is good for you, it's your education, you need to watch this. And he got so upset that he burst into tears and left the room because she would not listen to him. He was trying to say, I don't want to watch this. Anyway, when Richard went to go and fetch the kids, I think they'd spent the night with her, she was like, you protect your kids too much, you're so fundamentalist. Well, she didn't say that, but she was just implying that we weren't open to allowing our children to be educated. And Richard said, actually, it's not about that, because they will get educated, and they will watch Roman movies, and they will see heads being chopped off and everything, and that's okay. But actually, the higher way was that you didn't allow him to listen to his heart, because listening to your heart is the thing that stops you from doing those things in the quiet, private place that no one else sees. And you want them to listen to their hearts and not to be overrun.
So, it's I think the key there is celebrating and teaching your children how to do that as best they can. And you find that they pick it up quite quickly. They have the Holy Spirit partners with you on this thing. You don't have to know everything. And they think of the times that maybe you haven't had you couldn't say specifically, here's a scripture that would back up your sense of right and wrong, or it's not based on actual knowledge, but you have a disquiet in your hearts, a sense of right and wrong, outworking of that. And if you listen to the Holy Spirit, He leads you in paths of righteousness. And that's really what you must know, that from the age of about 5 or 6 or 7, when your children are now spending more and more time away from home, they're going to friends' house, family members' houses, they're going to school more and more. The reality is that thing of listening to their heart is their greatest protection mechanism. They may, even if you've not been able to teach them the right and wrong of a thing, we must know that the Holy Spirit is with them in that moment, and they will have a sense in their heart of right and wrong. And the skill is teaching them to